Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We want to thank you for attending today's NOPA webinar. Today, we will take a look at why procurement projects fail. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of this presentation. If you have any questions, please ask in the question box, and David Millington, our Director of Education for NOPA, will pose them to the presenter during the webinar as time allows. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to today's presenter, Mr. Ron Crabtree. Ron is CEO of MetaOps Inc. and Meta Experts. He has over 30 years experience in organizational and business innovation transformation, and along the way, more than 20 years in procurement and supply chain. He is an internationally recognized expert in cutting-edge business process improvement methodologies. Ron is a Master Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, having helped train and certify thousands of Lean Six Sigma and Six Sigma belts and driving hundreds of millions in value for clients. He is the co-author of 5 books on operational excellence. He has served as instructor for Villanova University and the University of San Francisco as a lead subject matter expert in Lean Six Sigma, Six Sigma Green and Black Belts, Masters of Business Analysis, Supply Chain Management, and Lean Supply Chain. Ron has past and current certifications or expertise in numerous industry recognized trainings and is the developer of the Top Facilitator Program for Leaders of Organizational Transformation. Ron, thanks for joining us today as we all look forward to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Amber, and I really appreciate the great introduction. So let's get right to it. We've got a lot of ground to cover in this webinar, and I'm going to do my best in the next 55 minutes-ish, right, to get through the core material. And the topics we're going to get to here would be understanding what are some of those key reasons for failure. In fact, we have a bonus in this webinar. We're going to ask you to participate in doing some self-ranking and some self-rating using the polling tool. And we're going to build that out so you can do your own private assessment of your risk of failure in procurement projects and talk a little bit about some of those key factors that make things happen. That'll get us about halfway through the time we have, and then we're going to get into, how do we include our suppliers in that vision of the future with success in our procurement projects? How can we create that comprehensive strategy and then develop an action plan that won't kill us and won't kill our suppliers as well? And then in the background, David's going to be capturing lots of questions. So if you have questions, I'd like you to use the tool in GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, I should say, and capture your questions as we go. And what's going to happen is David's going to watch for those as we go. He may interrupt through the webinar if there's a question we want to deal with. And then we'll try to get through this core material in a little under an hour, and then we'll shift to a Q&A forum. And that might run past the top of the hour, so if you have to go, we'll record it for the future. So let's just get a sense for who we have, kind of in our virtual room for this webinar today. And I'm going to ask Amber to help us out with putting up a polling question. We just have to get a sense for where you're at when you think about your personal skill set in this knowledge around, managing major procurement initiatives. Scale of 1 to 5, how would you rank your personal expertise? You'll click 1 if you think you're a novice, really don't know a whole lot about it. A 5 if you're kind of the guru, you have 30 years of experience and probably should run the webinar. Amber, can you fire up the polling question? Let's take a look at what we get.
It's in progress now.
Okay, great. Let's see if I can take a peek at the result. Audience view, here we go. So when you think we have about 75% quorum, let's go ahead and take a look at the results.
Okay, and it's showing 12% at 1. Okay. Our highest would be 48% at 3. And then we've got 2% that ranked in at 5, and that was with 84% of attendees voting. So 12% at 1.
Okay.
19% at 2. 48% at 3,
Okay.
19% at 4, and then again 2% at 5.
Okay, awesome. So we've got a range, and it's really good. I'm really glad, and thank you for participating in that quick poll. And we wanted to make sure the technology was behaving as well, because we have 6 polling questions coming up, and we're going to ask everybody in the audience to participate and kind of plug a number for where they think they are in their organization, and kind of keep track of that yourselves. And then we'll roll up the data and do some analysis of that. But through the polling questions, the 6 questions coming up, we'll have a chance to actually kind of come to a composite of what do we have in terms of our opportunity for failure, if you will, in major procurement initiatives. So thank you for that. So just a couple of things real quick. We will share copies of the presentation upon request, so it is being recorded. And the other thing that's really good is questions, right? So I might say something that kind of stimulates a question. Go ahead and get those, use the questions tool or the chat, either one. And then David's can be monitoring for those. And then we'll hold most of those for the end. But if something pops up that really is kind of a burning question, we'll stop and deal with it when we get to it. So what are some of those distinguishing features of what we would consider to be best-in-class procurement and supply organizations? And these 4 things kind of jump out at me. Like, we're really good at adopting the best practices, and we've integrated continuous improvement, CI meaning continuous improvement, throughout the webinar. And we've kind of got an organizational mandate as well. I mean, typically organizations that make or move stuff, and a lot of service organizations as well, way more than 50% of your total cost is in your supply. And so it really needs to be a top initiative, either in the top 5 things we're focusing on as an organization. And those are things I see a lot out there. And then we have to be really careful to develop our people, not just inside our own organization, but also outreach, and make sure that we're working with our supply partners, both upstream and downstream, to making sure they've got the right people with the right skills and the information they need to do a great job. And then we have to focus on, where do we actually get that competitive advantage? And it's not just about our price, right? It's really about the relationships and the total value derived across the value stream or the value chain, of which the procurement professional is a critical part. How do we really make sure that whole value chain is performing extremely well, so that not only our company, but also our partners can succeed as well? Now, some of the things we run into quite a bit is issues, if you will, is, supply chain function, the people doing procurement, it isn't just their job. They wear that hat and maybe several others. Or maybe your organization is challenged. You can't afford to hire those high-powered procurement professionals. Or maybe you believe, we're just a small fish in a really big pond, and we have no leverage with our suppliers. And another one, we're going to talk more about this through the webinars, to really truly understand our cost of ownership. And I'll warn you that if you're only focusing in on price, be careful what you ask for. And we'll talk more about some of the unintended consequences of just focusing in on price a little later in the webinar. Another challenge we see out there is, we tend to see some things characterizing in our supply, in our suppliers and across our supply chain, is maybe we have like many different suppliers for each commodity or material, or we're big believers in bidding and making everybody fight over price to try to get our business. Maybe we're forcing our vendors to finance our inventories, and maybe we've created an adversarial relationship that's keeping us from getting where we need to be, right? We can have low levels of trust. We can see we have real issues around sharing information. Maybe we never go visit our suppliers, and maybe we never invite them to see us. Maybe we're not tracking, really monitoring and giving feedback to our suppliers about their performance. Maybe we're trying to push everything out as paper using 3-4-way matching on the back end, versus moving toward technology-based, consumption-triggered replenishment or pull-based replenishment, where we can require little information and execute flawlessly day in and day out. I'll touch more on those a little bit later in the webinar. All right, so now we're going to have a little fun. And I have, a rather detailed document here that I'm going to use to aid us. And we're going to get into the 6 polling questions and do some analysis of our audience. So I've put up here basically a picture of this 11x17 continuum. And what I do with this continuum is that great success over the years in training programs, live training programs, seminars, working with groups of people. You can print this thing out to 11x17 and share it with a team, and then sit down and compare notes and really talk critically about these 6 key elements around what gets in the way, and let's just rate how successful can we be in our supply chain and in our procurement going forward. So I'm going to have this to refer to as we get into the polling questions. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to run through them one at a time, and then you just go ahead and give us a response. I'll have Amber monitor until we feel like we've got at least 75% of the audience weighing in, and then we'll cut it off and move on to the next one. Keep track of your personal responses. We're going to get a composite, right, of kind of the voting from everybody in our webinar today, and we'll use that to do a little analysis for this composite of the bigger group. But keep track of your personal scores, because at the end we'd like you to add up the values for all 6 of the questions, get a total for that, and then that total number will allow us to do a little bit of an assessment about your risk of failure when it comes to major procurement initiatives. So with that, let's get to the polling questions. So the first polling question is, and Amber, if you can go ahead and fire this one up, how many active suppliers for goods and services do you have in your organization? And what you're going to do is pick which of these 5 best matches up with your reality in your organization, right? So if you have less than 50 suppliers, lucky you, get a value of 1. If you have 51 to 400, it's a value of 2. If you have 400 to 700, it's a value of 3. 700 to 1,000 is a value of 4. And column 5, if you have more than 1,000 suppliers, you would click a 5. So I'm going to pause here for a second and let Amber monitor the result. And if you can kind of give me a rough idea where we ended up on that one, Amber, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, it's on the screen now. Can you see that, Ron?
Yeah, let me get to the audience view. I see it now. Very good. So I'm just taking a lean in here and take a good look. So we have quite a range. Wow, 34% of the audience has a relatively small number of suppliers, which, by the way, you will find out is a big advantage. And we have about 10% of the audience with more than 1,000 suppliers. It looks like we're clustered in that, I'm going to say an average of 401 to 700. So for question 1, we're going to go with box 3 and move on to the next polling question. For polling question number 2, how would you characterize the typical supplier relationship from a partnering perspective that you have with your vendors? And you would give the scores based on this. You're a 1 if almost all of your suppliers have partnered with us in a meaningful way. We seamlessly share cost data and quality data. We're typically looking at 3-year contracts. We trust our suppliers almost like we trust our CPA, right? We trust them with everything. We might be column 2 and maybe half of our suppliers are partnered, right, with longer term contracts. And we may or may not share information that's proprietary or sensitive. We might be value 3 if we have some partnering with some long-term agreements in place with some suppliers, and those relationships tend to be managed pretty tightly by top managers. You know, maybe there's some level of partnership, but you know, it's not on everything. It's for some number, and we do exchange some information. Column 4 or value 4 would be around partnering. Maybe this is a bit foreign, and we kind of have this policy of make sure we get 3 quotes, make sure they always fight for our business. We always want to get the low price, and if we can save a penny, we'll fire that supplier and move on to a different one. Only the most basic critical things would we consider sharing information. And then finally, you would be in a value 5 if the relationship we have is acrimonious at best, and very little trust and cooperation between us and our suppliers. Maybe we even get fired once in a while. So let's see what we got here for the results. So we have, interesting. So we have very small percentage where we have high level of partnering, about 17% at 50%. 29% of us are saying, we've got quite a few, but the bulk, 50% of us said, if we're partnering, it's only with certain key suppliers. So I'm going to go with, for question 2, a composite value of 4 on our scale. Okay, but remember, keep track of what you scored for your company. Let's move on to the next polling question. Number 3, formality and resource capabilities within your organization for managing supplier quality, procurement, supply chain management. So if you have a dedicated VP of procurement, along with, strong quality for supply management, you have many years of experience in formal education with our people, working with our suppliers, we're getting into what's called total cost of ownership. We have a lot of understanding of the total cost of ownership. If you could say all those things, you would be a value of 1, right? You'd be a value of 2 if maybe you have a VP of supply chain, procurement stuck under there. We have materials or a purchasing manager, maybe we have a quality manager with some experience, and we have some formal responsibility for supply management in place. You'd be a 2. A 3 is we have a couple people with some purchasing and quality training. They handle most of our procurement and supplier quality stuff. Maybe once a year, we'll do some reports on supplier performance and do some joint activities. Column 4, quality management purchasing is an ad hoc process. Many people do that as part of what they do. There's no central responsibility or control or action plans to develop and manage our suppliers. And finally, in column 5, supplier quality and purchasing is one of many hats. Many different people wear those hats. We're not really formally trained, and there's really no formal control or focus. So let's see what kinds of values we've got here for polling question 3. All right, wow, that's fantastic. So fully a third of our audience does have a VP of procurement and well-developed talent. And then we have 15%, yeah, we've got a VP of supply chain, procurement's rolled under there. 39% saying, yep, we have procurement managers, they do exist, so that's good. And then we have a very small percentage that would say it's very ad hoc, or it's really, worn by many hats. So we have a better value here. I'm going to give us an average value here of about a 2, of being in pretty good shape with respect to this risk factor for procurement success. Polling question number 4. Let's take a look at the technologies and methodologies that we have in place to control perfect fulfillment. It's the on-time delivery at quality and quantity and all those things. And it's pulling things in versus having to push everything in, right? We plan it, we push out the POs, they ship to a schedule, and we're trying to push everything in versus pulling it in. So we have a value of 1 if our entire ordering system is essentially paperless, right? Suppliers have direct visibility in demand management. We're doing some vendor managed inventory where the suppliers are doing point of use delivery and maintaining our inventories right inside our building. We pay our suppliers electronically based on what we've consumed. Very, very much a pull of value through the value stream. Number 2 on our list, right? We're about 75% electronic, maybe 25% pull systems, right? We do have POs that come out with 2 or 3 copies. We still have some paper. Column 3, maybe 50% electronic on the inbound, maybe 50% on the pull. We do continue to do some two-way matching and some quality inspection at receiving. Column 4, our process of ordering is mainly hard copy POs, maybe 10, 20% of our suppliers we can kind of pull stuff through. And finally, in column 5 or value 5, it's entirely hard copy POs. We have to push this out to the suppliers. We do 3-4-way matching. We don't trust supplier quality. We have to inspect everything really, really carefully when it comes in. And we don't focus really on developing those standards, right? So our suppliers can always perform. So let's take a good look here at our responses. Thank you. You guys are doing a fantastic job here, by the way. All right, so about 10% saying we're electronic. Good for you. That's awesome. About a third of the audience saying 75% automated and on some pull, so that's really good. 50% clicked automated, pull at about a 50% rate. Up to 25% was 20% and 5% was 0. So I'm going to give us a composite value here of about let's see here. Looks like I would go with a 3 for polling question, this particular polling question. All right, good job, everybody. We're going to move on to polling question 5. Let's talk about the level of active involvement in implementing what's called the understanding total cost of ownership data with jointly owned quality management systems, applying, Lean Six Sigma continuous improvement, right? So we might say we're a 1 if virtually everybody, right, in our industry and in our supply chain is doing this stuff, right? We're pursuing, Lean Six Sigma. We've been doing it for 10 years. We have a heavy commitment involved to continuous improvement, and we really share cost data. We truly understand everything about what drives the cost of ownership in our procurement. Column 2, I'd say we're at 2, maybe 75% have been involved with collaborating around total cost of ownership and really going together at continuous improvement and driving improvements. Column 3, maybe 50% in our industry are doing this stuff pretty aggressively, pursuing world-class quality and all these other things. Column 4, maybe 25%. We're really looking at total cost of ownership, total value derived. I'll share a couple of case studies later about what I mean by that. And there's some heavy commitment to world class. And then finally, column 5 is we can't even spell Lean Six Sigma. And we don't trust our suppliers to share any cost data. It's all very, put a wall up between us. So let's take a look at what we've got going on here. All right, so about 5% with 100% integration around total cost of ownership, about 8% around, 90% there. Okay, great. And then a handful is 56% of the audience. So across the board, we're saying, we're about a 3 or a 3.5, right? So we have right in the middle here, 56% of the responses, and then we have a really big chunk here at occasionally trying to integrate. So I think I will go with a value of 3 for the composite, but clearly most of us in the audience at least are a little early in this game of really understanding and managing total cost of ownership and driving value across the value chain. So great, let's get on to the last polling question. Let's talk about the level of involvement our suppliers have in developing new products and services, and this notion of design for Six Sigma and driving quality and continually driving to that total cost of ownership. So in column 1, our suppliers are integral to what we do. They're involved every step of the way, and we practice design for manufacturing and assembly, design for Six Sigma. We do joint Kaizen projects. We have just about every supplier once a year come in, the top 20% at least, and really sit, we work on 80% of our spend. Those 20% of the suppliers are coming in to meet with us every year and do some Kaizens. Column 2, suppliers are often integral. We conduct joint Six Sigma Kaizens, about maybe 10% of our suppliers that are 50% of our spend. Column 3, suppliers do get involved. We do conduct some joint Six Sigma Kaizen kinds of programs with maybe 2 to 4 times a year with key suppliers. Column 4, right? Many of our relationships tend to be adversarial. Sometimes the suppliers are part of our quality program. We'll do some joint Kaizens, continuous improvement things with a few key suppliers, maybe once a year, if at all. And then finally, column 5, why are you kidding, right? We don't trust our suppliers. Anything we get is done at the point of a bayonet. We have to make them do stuff to collaborate with us. And it's a pretty ugly scene. So let's see what we get for polling questions. Number 6. All right, awesome. So now okay, so it looks like we're going to be a little further out here in our numbering. Very small percentage where we have high integration, 17% at quite a bit of integration, which is excellent. About 20% of the audience thinking we're about 50% of the way there. We're kind of learning how as we go. The next 37% are saying, we could do a lot more of it, but we are doing it with key ones. And then 22% saying it doesn't happen. We're just not doing that stuff. So I'm going to have to say we have a composite value here of about a 4 on this particular item. So we're going to say we're about a 4 on quadrant 6. So good job, excellent. So now what I'd like you to do is privately add up the numbers that you used in your responses and get the grand totals. I'm going to add these up real quick. 7, 9, 12, 15 plus 4 is 19 points. So let's take a look at the diagnostic. And this is something that would be great fun to do with your team, by the way. And if you have this continuum document, you could take this and go have some real fun with this and sit down with folks and really talk about this and understand it. Let's just say, we're going to use the composite score, right? So if you added up your numbers and you had a total score of 10 or less, congratulations. Your chances to succeed, in my mind, are awfully high, right? So there's not a lot you really need to do to get better at what you're doing. If your score is 11 to 15, your personal score, then there's some risk of failure and there's some benefit to pursuing an aggressive quality supplier development program. And for certain business lines in certain areas, it could be very good. If you had 16 to 20 points, this is the composite value, by the way. We had 19 points. So on average across the participants in our webinar, we're kind of in this medium risk territory, right? There's some strong business case to start a more formal supplier development initiative that really gets at total cost of ownership, driving continuous improvement, and more shared accountability and responsibility around product and service development. If your organization scored 21 to 25 points, I'm feeling sorry for you right away here, right? You have a high potential for failure in your procurement projects. You're going to have to work really hard soon to develop relationships with your suppliers and start improving the total performance across your supply chain. And finally, if you're ended up with a score above 26 or higher, you have extreme risk. There are lots of issues can break you down here. A lot of dissonance across the supply, lack of responsiveness is probably killing you. And you really need to make this whole thing around supplier and integration, supplier development mission critical, because clearly you may be behind, right, in your industry, or if you're going to do this and you're doing it and your competitors are not, becomes a source of significant competitive advantage. So David, I'm going to take a breath. Do we have any burning questions yet we should handle before we move on? Might need to unmute.
No, not as yet. I haven't seen anything as yet. I have a couple of them.
All right, excellent. So we'll be saving those for as we roll on to the rest of the webinar.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're pretty much on the timeline I was shooting for. We're about halfway through the time and about halfway through the discussion. So thank you very much for participating in the poll. It's really helpful and gives us a sense for who you are and what you're up against out there. So how do we get started, right, at improving and driving expectations and better results? And I'm not going to read these slides by any means, but there's a lot of text here, but I'll let you just kind of read this. But you really got to get at how do we share in the risk and rewards going forward, you know? And we're going to be willing to try some things differently and take some risk, but it needs to be put around joint competitiveness, right? The other thing I think is really important is you need to make your suppliers, particularly the ones that supply those critical things that really make or break you as a business, have them come see you. Have them work out and take a look at what you're actually using their product or service to do so they can really understand how you get value from what they provide. And not a bad idea, if you're going to do that, maybe you should send some of your folks out to actually go to the supplier operation and see what it is they're going through to actually create that value for us, right? The goods, the services they provide us. You might see them doing things they don't need to do because you don't even care about it, right? They're spending time and money making something perfect when maybe it doesn't need to be. There could be some opportunity in shared value by driving that. Look at how do we become real partners, right? How do we transparently share demand information and what's coming down the pike? What do we see as things changing in the future? You know, can we go to zero-based year-over-year improvement targets? You know, eliminate waste together. And what I mean by zero-based is, you know, don't get too caught up in industry standards and benchmarks. You just measure how are we performing today. For example, they're running at 87% perfect fulfillment. Well, let's just say 87% is great. Maybe it's industry leader, but you know, we're not going to be happy with that. We're going to look for a 25% delta or a 50% delta in improving from that baseline target. So that's what I mean by zero base. You get to what is it today? That's the 0 point. You pick what perfection looks like, come somewhere in between, and pick a target in there and really start to work at that. And then what are some things we can do to co-design better products or processes? Or can we develop all new alternatives to achieve the desired value we're looking for and drive some savings and some opportunity that just totally beyond what you would normally expect in a normal supplier relationship? I've got a couple of case study stories I'll share about that here in a few minutes. I'm kind of a big believer in setting what are called big, hairy, audacious goals. You know, you kind of shoot for the stars and maybe you can hit the moon. So maybe you do stick something out there, 25% reduction year over year in lead time. What I mean by that is it's the amount of time it takes them to respond to a significant change that you need them to enact in the supply, or if they're telling you it's 12 weeks lead time to provide the product, you're going to challenge them. We're looking to see you get that down to 9, right? And we're looking for that here within the next year. And let's work it out together. What do we have to do together to allow you, the supplier, to collapse that lead time? Because when you do that, you carry less inventory, you can respond better to your customers, which means you have an opportunity to expand the growth and your competitiveness of an organization. How about improving quality? Well, quality is one of those things that's poorly understood when you talk about total cost of ownership. The total cost of quality is very much a cousin of that. Do we truly understand all of the actual cost of quality to get our product or good out the door right the first time to our customers? And do we understand that all the way backward through our supply chain to our suppliers, and where those true costs of quality come in? You know, we typically look at costs of non-conforming quality, but we never step back and say, what's the total cost of quality, right? Those inbound inspections, when you're making sure that the supplier sent you good stuff, that is considered cost of quality, good quality, but in fact, it's maybe not. If we knew the supplier could ship us good stuff every single time, and I'm not spending time and money putting it through quality, that is an actual cost of our total cost of quality that we can go after. Can we move to pull systems, or the Japanese word kanbans, for materials that have a suitable demand pattern and lend themselves to that kind of a pull through, and get the value of reduced paperwork, reduced ordering costs, eliminating stockouts as a headache, managing first in, first out inventory, improving our ability to have traceability all the way through the process? You'd be amazed at what could be done using pull systems. You know, let's drive the cost, but maybe you go from, and you use the word here, cost, not price. So cost is that total cost of ownership I'm talking about. What's the total cost of ownership to do business with that supplier? And can we drive that down 10% year over year? I grew up in the automotive supply chain. And in that industry, if you're not familiar with it, the automakers demand you put in your contract a 5% decrease in price every year for 5 years. So you start out at this, and at the end of 5 years, you're getting paid 25%, 30% less. You've got to work with your supply chain to figure out how to respond to that kind of pressure from your customers. Look at returnable packaging, recyclable packaging. There's a ton of pressure on us to become more environmentally, ecologically sensitive, reducing our carbon footprint. That's a big deal. Maybe we should be doing something around with key suppliers, high volume things, consume a lot of expendable packaging. What can we do to start driving that? You know, one of the things the auto industry has adopted is trying to go to zero landfill assembly plants. Well, those guys aren't doing it for charity. They're doing it for a reason. They actually save money if you're not pushing stuff to a landfill. The big thing about this, the message I like to get here, is you don't get here without big changes. You have to set those big goals. Yeah, shoot for 25%. If you only get 10, you're going to be a hero. Trust me. All right. So let's talk about planning your initial efforts. And one of the things I've found is, you know, you can't tackle everything, right? You can't go out and like boil the ocean here. So I would say if you got to get started here, pick a high impact value stream where you know there's a lot of value. You've looked at your sales, what's being pushed out to the market. You know, here's a string of value we're doing that's really big. And let's get a team and really go after that. But it's not just purchasing and procurement. We need marketing, sales engineering from your side and from the supplier side. Your accounting folks. If your accounting folks aren't behind you and supporting you and helping you to understand and measure total cost of ownership, you're going to have a problem, right? Definitely y'all, right? Procurement professionals, you need to be there. The folks that actually consume the products and services, your production and operations folks, they're your customer, right? They're where the go to Gemba actually happens, the value. So those folks need to be there so that they can participate in helping understand how do I actually derive the value from that supplier's product or service. If you have Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement experts, get them in there, make them part of your process. You know what? Sponsoring executives is a really important thing. You know, if you're going to charter something, you better have sponsorship and the support you need to be successful, right? Don't short shift this, make adequate time. And then right up front, we're going to scorecard this thing. We're going to have regular process reviews. We're going to have toll gate reviews and have some real discipline around driving and understanding our total cost of ownership across that value chain. Let's talk for a minute now about how do you create a very comprehensive supplier and supply chain development strategy? How do we do that? You know, how do we make that happen? Well, there's some pieces, right? And first of all, make it really clear. This is about improving results while driving down cost. And remember, we're talking about the total cost of ownership. And what's critical here is we have to talk about all of the costs. And I already talked about, you know, the total cost of quality. What does it actually cost to produce a quality good or service, both the cost of non-conforming and the things we're doing to actually manage and implement quality measures, you know, the cost of our quality management system. And I've had great success, just a few stories here, a brief 3 stories. Like I had a supplier that was shipping us the textiles that go into automotive headliners. That's the inside roof of your automobile. And we were under that mandate, right? Every year we had to cut our price 3 to 5% for our customers. So we were like, come on, suppliers, help us find where we can reduce the waste. So I had the suppliers come in and actually observe how we were consuming this textile, right? So it's knitted nap nylon with a foam backing, basically. It comes on a roll. And I had them come in and really look at, how do we take that off, cut it to length, get it into our tools, press it into the headliners. And we started talking about what makes up the actual cost of that supplier's material. And we found out the foam that they would laminate to the fabric was a significant component. And then we started looking at that and we realized, we don't need foam to go all the way out to the edges of that fabric. We just need it to be in the middle where we actually make that headliner part. So they were able to change their process to put a narrower strip of foam onto that knitted textile, and we could just take that out, right? So we were able to cut the cost of the foam that was going into our product that we were buying by 15%. That was a big deal when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of yards of this material that we were consuming every year. I'll tell a story about alternative materials and technologies, but sometimes if your suppliers can come in and spend some time with you, or maybe potential suppliers you've never done business with, just have them come in and look at what you're doing. They might have some alternative materials or a different way of solving that problem. They can help you improve your processes. Look at things you can do to reduce the cost of disposal and recycling, expendable packaging, right? Moving to returnables, rethinking how we have the suppliers package our stuff can make a really big difference. Put pressure on continuous improvement, making them provide evidence. We typically will issue a corrective action, like if a supplier ships us bad material, we'll give them a QAR, right, quality action request, and they're supposed to do a project and tell us how they're going to improve quality, but you got to go way beyond that. What are you doing internally, Mr. or Miss Supplier, to continuously improve and drive out the waste in your processes and improve the value that you're bringing to me, your customer? In fact, requiring them to participate in joint continuous improvement activities like value stream mapping, which I'll talk about in a minute, can bring tons of value from places you would never expect in your future costs, right? So institute measurements. If you're not doing supplier measurement, measuring on-time delivery, on-time quality, their perfect fulfillment, their responsiveness to changes, all those other things, you need to start down that path. Right? Regular review of what are those improvements we're looking for from our suppliers, and regular part of that is part of our review of our total supply chain performance. Very important. Putting out that scorecard with those stretch, big, hairy, audacious goals, and chartering some specific joint projects to go after specific types of cost, total cost that we want to manage, on-time delivery, quality, right, responsiveness, that's all part of that, and track that to scorecards. So putting up on screen here, this notion of what do I mean by a cross-functional value stream map? And properly done, you can capture an immense amount of information. If you go back, you start with you and your consumption of their material or service, and you start to work backward through the suppliers and everything they're doing, and you map out all of the steps that it takes to accomplish bringing you the value you need and the steps you go through to consume it. And you capture hard data, capture the time, the cost, and the quality at each and every step of the process, right? For those key stakeholders or functions across the supply chain. But don't stop there. Which IT systems are involved? Get samples of those procedures. What are the inputs and the outputs in play? Capture artifacts and use that to bring your joint supply, right, with your suppliers into a room and really sit down and take a look at, with this model, you can create an activity-based costing view of what it takes to actually execute from the beginning when your supplier starts to provide one piece or one part or one element of service, everything that happens to it all the way down to you finish consuming it and using it in your product or service. And you understand all that and you have measurements to it, time, cost of quality, right? All of that good stuff. Very powerful. You can start to do what's called Pareto analysis. You can do an 80-20, say, you know what, there's 165 steps in this process, but you know what, 15 or 20 or even 30 of those steps is 80% of the actual cost or the total cost of ownership? That's good to know. Two opportunities. Where do I focus to improve, right? Those vital few that represent the big spend or the big cost. And then what about those other 80% of the steps? Are those really adding value? Do we need those steps at all? Could we eliminate those steps because they're adding time, delays, confusion, opportunities for failure, and get rid of those going forward? But doing that as a joint activity for the entire value chain that we're driving across the business. Here's something a lot of companies don't think about, and even if you're a small fish in a big pond, go reach out to the highest level executives in your supplier's organization and just ask for help. And you could be pretty surprised. I was surprised when I tried it. By just asking, you can begin to find out things that your supplier could do for you just never thought about, because these executives that run these supplier companies are not dummies, man. They're paying attention. They're looking at the market. They're looking at the trends. They are doing business with your competitors, and they're doing stuff to get ahead of that. Well, if you fail to ask, shame on us, right? Don't think you're a small fish. Go ask. Don't accept that you don't have leverage, because I can tell you that the top officials of your suppliers are just like politicians. They hate to hear about problems, even if it's their small little fish customers. All right, so some other things you can do to be proactive is get out in front of this, right? Find out how other organizations like yours and in different industries even, how are they going at it? How are they developing their supply chains, their supplier network, their procurement strategies going forward? Do some networking, right? Join in and become active in some of your industry's trade groups. Find out how they're using their suppliers, and they've got the same problems you do. Talk about that. Say, hey, do you guys run into this kind of a problem? Talk with folks, listen to what they have to say. You'd be surprised at all the value you can get from just very basic networking and paying attention to what's going on out there in the marketplace. Look for creative approaches with your suppliers and try to take away some of the barriers going forward. Consider things like what are called vendor managed inventories, particularly commodities. In the fastener industry, for example, this is very mature, very common nowadays to see if you use tons of nuts and bolts and stuff like that, that they'll actually come in and actually maintain a point of use inventory and come in and inventory that for you and automatically replenish it, and you never have to lift a finger. And then they get paid as you consume it, right? That pay of bill kind of strategy can be very attractive to your suppliers, and it can be a good deal for you. You can drive down that total inventory. You don't own the inventory, right? It's on their books, so you're not having to carry that cash or worry about it. You're not worried about obsolescence and all these other good things. And maybe you pay as billed. As you consume it, you pay for it, right away. Make it worth your supplier's time to actually take that on and reduce your risk and your liability. Think about, I use a ton of this service or this product in my business, and today I have to ship it out, have them do their thing, and ship it back in, or they have to ship it to me and I have to inspect it. I do a bunch of who-shot John. Maybe they could do a kiosk, right? Put something right inside your building or in your facility to bring their value add without shipping it out or waiting for the delay or for the processing or the trucking or for them to put it in their inbox. Maybe you've got an opportunity there. Let me share a couple of real life stories. Automotive supplier, United Technologies Automotive, we were producing these very large headliners for vans, right? Big headliners going into vans that will hold 8 or 10 people. And we had this process, it was a cutting edge process at the time, where we were using a hard foam sheet as kind of the backing. We had a layer of fiberglass, and then we had the napped knitted textile with a little bit of foam on it. And then we had what was called a scrim. They called it scrim, and it was the coat of textile that went between the tool and the headliner. So think about the headliner as being a sandwich, right? I've got my net fabric, I've got some fiberglass, I've got my hard foam, I've got my scrim. But then we would spray an adhesive. It was a heat-activated adhesive that got sprayed on both sides of that hard foam. And then hot tools come down and bake this thing. And we had a couple of major problems, right? We were having all kinds of issues with the adhesive migrating during that heating and forming process. It would migrate to the surface of the tool. It would build up over time. It would cause these parts to stick. And every time the part stuck in it and it didn't come out of those tools, when the tools opened up, was scrap. And that was a big deal because we were running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to keep up with the volume. And everyone we scrapped with big bucks and one we couldn't ship. This is a big deal. And I was like under, the guy running procurement, managing our suppliers, I was getting all kinds of grief. So I was reaching out, and every supplier that I could find that was remotely involved with textiles and the processing of, and I was bringing them in to look at this stuff. And lo and behold, a supplier showed up and looked at what we were doing and said, we have a non-woven textile solution. It's actually a process we use much like making paper, where we lay down the fabric into a sheet. And it looks almost exactly like this woven textile you're using today, but we believe this is an alternative product, could provide a barrier and stop this adhesive from migrating to your tooling. Turned out that was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. We jumped through all kinds of hoops, with our customer to get them to approve us to do the trials. We trialed it, we got it to work. And I'm going to tell you, it was worth like $1 million a year to us at that plant, just at that one plant. We cut the scrap by 90%. We never had to have downtime to climb inside these stupid tools and try to grind all that adhesive off, and get all that off the tools, which by the way would damage the tooling. We got rid of so much rework, so much scrap, and we improved our output by 20% by just changing that one component, by creatively tasking suppliers to come up with an alternative. And here's the best part, my friends. That non-woven that we use, right, that laid down product was cheaper. It was 25% cheaper than the woven textile I was using in the first place. So it's just amazing. So the other story I thought I would share around this notion of co-locating suppliers inside your building is, think about a very large cell phone, right, company that makes and sells cell phones, or one of the major distributors of cell phones. And what I witnessed with one of my customers is they had this huge distribution center with, 4 million square feet, I think, with all kinds of automation. In one side, you would get, the phones, they get packaged, and then they'd be shipped out to the customers. And then they had a backflow of all of the bad phones. These would be phones that were just plain returned. These were phones that had damage. These were phones that didn't work or whatever. And in the old process, they would ship them off to my customer. They would fix them and ship them back, and then they would reintegrate them into the supply chain to resell them. And finally, somebody said, wait a minute, let's take the repair operations from our supplier, stick it right in the middle of the distribution center. And when those phones come in that need repair, they get routed right across the repair lines for our integrated supplier and directly back into the value chain. So think about, before it'd take 3 to 6 weeks from the time I shipped out a phone that needed repair to when I would get it back and put it back in the value stream. They took that down to 6 to 8 hours from the time that phone came in to the time it was reintroduced to the value chain. Imagine what that was doing. It was a really big deal. And we'd eliminated all the distribution and handling costs associated with packaging these phones and shipping them off the supplier, and they got to repackage them, send them back to us. Eliminated all of that, right? We could just unpack it, fix it, right back into the box to resell it, and gone. Be creative. There's tons of opportunity out there if you're willing to open your mind up to the opportunities. So how do you build a plan that won't kill you or your suppliers, right? Do a Pareto analysis right up front, the 80-20 rule. Zero in on the high impact opportunities, right? Look at the relationships where we can drive value rather quickly. Do that big value stream map I'm talking about, but don't boil the ocean. Pick a product or a line of product and chase that through. Make sure you get executive sponsorship and set those initial big, hairy, audacious goals. Pick projects where we have mutual value and then go after that low-hanging fruit. You don't have to kill everybody to make that happen, yourself or your suppliers, right? Share those benefits, share those lessons learned with your suppliers, get after the scorecarding and then rinse and repeat, right? Build the skills in your team, build the skills in your supplier teams, leverage relationships wherever you can, and just go make it happen. And, oh, by the way, it's never as easy as it sounds, right? Some things to be aware of is be careful, right? What gets measured gets done. And the bad news is be careful what you ask for because you might get it. So make sure you get your accounting folks involved with this because traditional accounting, traditional metrics can be a real problem. Do some homework, understand, things like activity-based costing. My friend Gary Kokes has a great book on that, Throughput Accounting by Thomas Corbett, if you're in a processing type environment. Remember the lowball supplier doesn't mean it's cheapest in the long run. In fact, it could be the most expensive supplier if you take a look at total cost of ownership. Use the value stream mapping to get at where those real opportunities are, because if you don't, you're going to leave stuff on the table and build a solid business case for change. Without that top-down commitment, you're going to have a problem, right? So you got to do the benchmarking. You have to manage upward to our leaders in the organization and out to our suppliers and pick those critical 3 to 5 things to really drive. You know, do some pilots, look for those quick hits. Start developing a culture that honors continuous improvement, taking chances. You know, you might have it as a professional in procurement, you might have to buffer your people from a little bit of guff we might get from unenlightened management or other functions that don't get what we're trying to do. We've got to build some urgency for change, right? Because the resistance to change is going to be a big problem. That was one of the reasons we did this webinar. Is you got to understand what are those barriers to change, right? And what do we do about that as part of the solution? And this is some of the things you would do.
Hi, Ron.
Yes, sir. Yes,
I'm sorry, I have a question. On the matter of resistance to change, this question came up. Do these practices work in hospital supply chains? And do we have any case studies to support that?
The answer is yes to both. I actually developed custom training materials in Lean Six Sigma for the Association for AHA, I think it is, and it was the hospital nonprofit organization focused in on hospital operations. This would be building maintenance, everything they were doing to support supporting the caregivers. This would be, you know, ordering and managing the inventory of hospital beds, providing staff to move patients, the whole 9 yards. That's what this association is all about. And we found all kinds of interesting things, you know, that people were doing out there in the hospital industry. So all of these ideas absolutely apply in the medical industry, you know, in the context of a hospital, you know, nursing care, nursing homes and the like. And we'd be happy to follow with a couple of case studies. I'm just sitting here thinking for a second about, you know, where those opportunities would lie. And, you know, certainly one of the things I've heard about that's pretty powerful is, I've seen this in play, is you think about all the supplies that caregivers use. And what I've seen, you may encounter this, is inside the medical provider, the hospital caregiver, they actually set up units where the suppliers were doing a vendor managed inventory of all of the consumables that were used to provide care, syringes, you know, basic medicine, basic, you know, aspirin medicines, bandages, you know, all that kind of stuff. And rather than trying to manage that with a formal stock keeping system, they set it up with a vendor managed inventory pretty much at the point of use so that the caregivers could cycle by there, scan their ID, take the items they need, scan them, be gone and go take care of it. So they didn't have to, you know, keep inventory at the point of giving the care. They could take it as they needed. We had an electronic signal go automatically to the suppliers so they understood exactly what was being consumed. And therefore they reduced the amount of inventory they needed to have in the building. They reduced all the costs associated with managing the inventory in the building. And absolutely, you know, there's some real opportunities. David, is that good enough on that question?
Yes, the response I got was, thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic, thank you. All right, well, there's other resources available to you here, and we'll get into wrap up here in a moment. You know, you have Next Level Purchasing Association, and, you know, I've been working with David for a bit here, and they've got a pretty darn impressive set of standard commercial off-the-shelf materials available to help people learn many of these things I've talked about here today. And there's a custom training offer out there, and also through an LPA, you can have experts, you know, people like me come in and work with you and help you learn these things and get them implemented using the standard NLPA materials. Of course, I've been involved with the ASM Apex organization for most of my life, and they've got tons of good stuff out there. You have supply chain management associations, Institute of Supply Management. There may be consortiums of special interest groups within your industry. Never pass up a chance to leverage Google. Just go out and search and see what people are putting out there, right? And take a look at certification programs to get better and better at what you do, and you know, pick those things you should read up on. So with that, let's get into wrap up here. You know, if you're an organization that's looking at planning a new procurement project or kicking off a big initiative to make something happen, and you need to reduce those risks of failure, and you want to, you know, develop skills in your leaders and your procurement workforce and drive real enterprise value through applying all these best practices in supply management, then we have a couple of things we can offer. One is, if you'd like, we can actually send one of our experts in to spend a day with you, sit down with you and your folks, walk through, take a look at what you're doing. Look at those top 3 to 5 opportunities to increase your ability to execute the way you want to, and begin to lay out a roadmap, right, to get after that superior performance that you're looking for. That's a value of $4,000, but we would be no charge, just the cost of expenses. We just ask you to get that scheduled to occur before the end of September and get that committed by next week, the end of next week. Or here's another way we can help. We can put together a couple of experts and get it online with you and sit down with you online for a couple of hours, right? And talk through with your leadership team. What is it you're doing? What have you tried? Where are you headed? We call it a remote council of experts, or any other pressing matter, and just help you think this through and develop a really good plan. Again, that's worth $600 to $1,200, but we'll do that at no cost. Again, make a commitment to do that with us by the end of next week. Let's get it completed by September 26th, and we'll do that to help you get off the dime and make things happen. So again, 2 choices here, the one day, come see you, expenses only, or jump online, right, and help you guys take a look at it. Take that next step. And you can use this link right here to get to my calendar, and you can grab a time to talk about it, get it organized. So the bit.ly/executive chat, drop that into your browser. That should get out to my calendar, pick me, and we'll get a time to talk. All right then, let's wrap up here, right? Here's what we got into today, right? We really had a great, and by the way, thank you so much for participating in the polling questions, to really think about what are those components that if they're weak can really drive our risk, and use the continuum exercise to get your self-assessment. And then some strategies, not detailed strategies, but high level. How do we engage our suppliers in that vision of the future and build out a comprehensive strategy and come up with a plan that won't kill us or our suppliers? So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time today to participate, listen in on the live or the recorded webinar. And with that, we're pretty much at the hour here, and I'm going to leave it to David to manage any other questions we want to handle before we wrap up.
Sure, I have one more, and it is more of a statement, but you would need to see the relationship with our suppliers as a win-win relationship.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? And that can be a real paradigm shift depending on the nature of your industry and how you guys got to where you are. And that can be a real culture shift of saying, we need to get away from, we have to have a wall here, we keep them at arm's length, we don't share information, to how do we create that win-win? And that's where you almost have to start with a phone call with whoever owns that supplier, right? Top executive, and say, hey, are you guys doing this with your other customers? We'd like to go down this path. Can we open the door and start that conversation? And if you're willing to put stuff on the table about things we can actually share, the win can be really big. And without, naming names, one of the major automakers, this is 20 years ago, came up with a program. They were pushing their suppliers, and the suppliers brought them cost savings opportunities. They would split the savings 50-50 with the supplier. They'd take half and let the supplier keep half. That was fantastic. And I can tell you some suppliers really did well by taking advantage of it. The rest of the story is there was a different leadership team came in at the automotive supplier, and they killed that program because they decided they would just cut the prices on all the POs and make more money that way. But that's a story for another day. David, did I handle that well enough, or do you want to get deeper into that? Or do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with that methodology, splitting the savings and enhancing the degrees of collaboration and innovation, involving the suppliers in the processes, and creating that avenue where it's not us initiating or approaching the suppliers, where as opposed to a mutual process, and innovating and leveraging their engineering capabilities and their assets as well, and really understanding those parameters. And it is very important for those of us who have to engage new suppliers that we incorporate those parameters in our supplier selection processes and criteria. And this way we have a good understanding of who we bringing into our value chain from a supplier perspective. What's their ability to collaborate, their openness and the desire to collaborate, and the capabilities. And also, as Ron had mentioned earlier, going downstream and perhaps some of the customers that we serve, they may also have capabilities that we could leverage and collaborate. So both upstream and downstream collaboration is important. And it forces a better understanding of the total value chain and how us as procurement professionals could bring a higher degree of value. I have another question here, and it's more of a statement, but we could frame it in a question format. How would the business structure impact the ability for procurement professionals to leverage some of these practices? And what are the constraints?
That is a loaded question. That is a very loaded question. If you think about traditional organizational structures versus matrix organizations, structure can make a big difference. So there's 2 or 3 pieces to this. One is, where does procurement fit in the structure? Is it a core, high-level, enterprise important function that has high visibility with the executive with enough political stature to look across the value chain and get people to listen as we move our way into adopting some of these great ideas that I've shared here today? So that's one big piece of it, right? And then how are we organized? Are we organized in silos where we hand off a lot of stuff, right? So it's purchasing, we have planning folks that plan everything, and they hand it off to purchasing, and they got to buy it, and then they hand it off to production. They have to make it, but we have walls in between us. We're not collaborating. We're not encouraged to collaborate. We operate in silos. Is another piece of the organizational structure that can be a huge roadblock. So depending on what you're up against, you may be forced to figure out how to get to your upper level management, help them understand the value proposition of what's possible, and begin to look at, how do we get past or break down some of those silos? Can we create, for the sake of discussion, a captain of the value stream about, for the sake of discussion, our total cost of ownership of using this kind of stuff or products in our business, and have somebody with enough political stature to start connecting these dots across our organization and then backward into the supply chain. Can we start to get something going? Can we at least pilot something, give it a try to demonstrate some success? If you're highly matrix today, that's going to be easier to do. If you're highly functional, that's going to be a real challenge. I mean, David, what would you add to that? Might need to unmute. Hi, David, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay,
understanding the structure is understanding the structure, of course, it's very, very, very important. And understanding that resistance to change, it's a natural thing. And to be able to assess and to understand your organization's ability to implement change and transformation is important, and where the roadblocks are, and collaborating and sort of building sponsorship, internal sponsorship for removing the necessary roadblocks. So it's definitely depends on a heavy degree of ability to collaborate and understand your organization's ability to change and to transform. In one of our courses, the 14 procurement best practices, one of the first best practices is leveraging the commodity and category teams, where we would engage and involve, at least from an internal perspective, the other processes in the organization. So on the procurement side, we engage, and we are mandated to ensure that we interact with the suppliers, and we make sure that we're able to position the necessary raw material inputs, etc. But we have to be able to engage the people who use those inputs. So we're talking about the make or the production processes, and then once then the next in line process will be the warehousing functions and the logistics functions. So that it's very important that we engage and we build those category teams with key stakeholders from all of those positions. And of course, as to Ron's point, we look externally, we go upstream. We could, have a commodity category team where we have suppliers involved and customers as well. So this, so building a team of that nature that is representative of the entire value chain is very, very important. And the key with that is to really understand their predicaments, their constraints, their concerns, and to build that understanding is very important.
All right.
I have another question here, Ron, and it's how could we get, as procurement professionals, get leverage if we are a low, how should I put it, a low priority customer? So, from our supplier perspective, and you mentioned it before, we don't constitute a high degree of spend with that supplier. So how could we get leverage?
So I'm just make sure I understand the question. So the question is, how do I get leverage when I'm a small fish in a big pond?
Exactly.
With our suppliers. Okay, great. Well, I think the simplest thing to do, and I said it in the webinar, is figure out who you can get to at a higher level in this organization and just ask, right? Say, hey, I'm a small fish and you're in your big pond. We'd like to figure out how to be a much bigger fish. We think you could probably help us. We'd like to buy a lot more of your product and service. Perhaps there's an opportunity where you could talk to them about, we don't spend a lot of money with you guys, but we'd like to spend more. So maybe we can take a look at ways we could buy more stuff from you and other value add your organization can provide ours so that we can be a bigger fish. So you're going to find they'd be pretty receptive to those kinds of conversations. The other thing I would do is do a little research, with, if there's a consortium or some kind of organization that's out there in your industry that's focused in on the kinds of problems you're dealing with here, do a little research, ask around a little bit, what are other people doing to try to manage that problem? The other thing I've seen small organizations do that are part of, that are small fish in a big pond is look at, can you get involved with an organization that's doing consortium buying? And what I mean by that is organizations that try to pool the spend for many smaller organizations so that they have the big voice with the customer. And take a look at, are there such organizations that you can piggyback on and tap into that are doing big volume spend and you can benefit from carrying less inventory, much more responsive, and a lower price at better quality at the same time. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. David, what would you add to that?
Yes, I agree. Also, you mentioned earlier collaborating and joining organizations that bring together suppliers and customers from different industries, and to leverage our network because maybe there's some supplier or one of our customers in our network that could help one of our suppliers that they could extrapolate a great degree of value from.
Right.
And so we're leveraging the cumulative sum of our spend plus the value of our network, and then don't underestimate the value of your network. To really understand that is very, very important.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, I'll let you get us into wrap up unless Amber wants to handle that.
Yes, no problem at all. Ron, thank you for an amazing webinar. It was very informative and we appreciate you joining us today. Look forward for new ones as well. And I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar and stay tuned to find out more about next month's webinar. Have a great day.